My cousin called me a failure at a family reunion, but didn't know who I was. He laughed and said, "Some people just aren't meant to succeed." My aunt chimed in, "Oh, sweetie, you really should Google their name." His face turned white as he pulled out his phone. I never looked forward to family reunions. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate my family, but I had long since accepted that these gatherings weren't really about reconnecting. They were about competition, about showing off, about finding out who had gained weight, who had lost their job, who was still single, and who had managed to climb the imaginary family hierarchy since the last get-together. And yet, every year, I still showed up. Maybe it was for my mom, who always told me, family is family, no matter how messy. Maybe it was out of some stubborn sense of obligation. Or maybe, deep down, I just wanted to remind myself why I kept my distance. This year was no different. I pulled up to my Aunt Lisa's house in Connecticut, a sprawling colonial-style place that had always screamed, "Look at us, we're doing just fine." The driveway was packed with expensive cars, half of which probably belonged to people still struggling to pay them off. I sighed, gripping the steering wheel for a second before finally stepping out. The smell of cinnamon, baked ham, and overpriced wine filled the air as soon as I walked in. Dozens of voices talked over each other, a mix of polite small talk and thinly veiled judgment. I slipped in quietly. No one noticed. At least, not at first. Then I heard his voice. "Man, some people just aren't meant to succeed," Damon said, shaking his head dramatically. "You can try all you want, but if you don't have it, you just don't have it." A few people chuckled. Someone muttered, "Oh boy, here we go." I turned slightly and saw him. Damon, my cousin, my childhood BLOY. The golden boy who had once been the center of every family gathering. He hadn't changed much. Same CCKY smirk, same loud presence, same way of talking like he was the main character in every conversation. The only difference was that he wasn't the football-playing high school star anymore. He was just a 30-something-year-old guy who still carried himself like he was the king of the world. I wondered if he even remembered me. He must have felt my stare because his eyes landed on me. He paused for a second, then gave me that lazy, arrogant grin. "You," he said, pointing at me like he was trying to place my face. "You look familiar." I didn't answer. His smirk widened. "Wait, are you one of those cousins from out of town? What's your name again?" I still didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be mysterious, but because I wanted to see just how far he would take this. Aunt Lisa, his mother, sighed and gave him a look. "Damon." But he ignored her. "Nah, seriously," he said, still staring at me. "I swear I know you. You're—" He snapped his fingers like he was trying to recall a distant memory. "You used to be like, quiet, right? Always reading some nerdy book or something." A few people around us exchanged awkward glances. My mother, standing a few feet away, tightened her grip on her wine glass. Damon chuckled. "Man, I haven't seen you in years. What have you been up to? You still, figuring things out?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He grinned like he had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. "I mean, some people just don't get there, you know?" He shrugged, like he was being sympathetic. "Nothing wrong with it. Not everyone's meant to make it big." Silence. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I just let his words hang there. Aunt Lisa sighed again, this time rubbing her temples. "Oh, sweetie," she said, shaking her head. "You really should Google their name." Damon frowned. "What?" Lisa gave him a small smile. "Go on. Look them up." Damon's smirk faltered just slightly, but he pulled out his phone anyway. He typed in my name, still casual, still confident. And then I saw it. The exact moment his face changed. His smirk faded. His posture stiffened. His fingers twitched slightly as he scrolled. His eyes flicked up to mine, then back down to the screen. Because there it was. Articles. Business magazines. Interviews. Headlines. My name in places he never expected to see it. I knew exactly what he was reading. That I had built a company from scratch. That I had sold it for millions. That my name was listed among the top entrepreneurs in my industry. I wasn't the quiet, awkward kid he remembered. I wasn't the cousin he had written off years ago. I was something entirely different now. Damon swallowed, but it was clear his mouth had gone dry. "You," his voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "Wait, you're—" "Yeah," I said simply. The room had gone quiet. Someone stifled a laugh. My mother sipped her wine, her expression unreadable but unmistakably amused. I saw Damon's grip tighten on his phone. I could almost hear his thoughts racing, scrambling to rewrite the narrative he had clung to for so long. He forced a laugh. Too loud, too forced. "Damn, man. I had no idea. That's crazy." I didn't say anything. He tried again. "I mean, I knew you were smart, but I didn't think." He stopped himself, probably realizing that finishing that sentence would make it worse. Aunt Lisa was watching him with an expression I couldn't quite place. Something between amusement and mild disappointment. Damon looked around the room, maybe searching for someone to bail him out. But no one did. And that's when I realized something. I had nothing to prove. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I didn't feel the need to explain how I got here. I didn't need to rub it in, because the truth was already written all over Damon's face. And that was enough. I let the silence stretch for a little longer before finally giving him a small, knowing smile. Some people, I said, just aren't meant to succeed, huh? Damon's jaw tightened. He forced another laugh, but this time, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. I glanced around the room, taking in the shifting expressions, the quiet recognition, the way the power dynamic had changed in a matter of seconds. Yeah, this reunion was different, and Damon would never forget my name again. Damon looked like he wanted to disappear. His fingers clenched around his phone, his knuckles whitening as he stared at the screen like he could do it. But the words stayed the same. The articles, the interviews, the success, my success, were all still there, undeniable. The tension in the room was thick, hanging between us like a storm cloud about to break. I could see the way his mind raced, scrambling for a way to save face. He finally forced out a laugh, though it sounded nothing like his usual confident, booming chuckle. This one was thin, forced. Damn, man, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. That's impressive. I said nothing. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't used to being the one who had to fumble for words. Aunt Lisa, still sipping her wine, raised an eyebrow at her son. You've always been quick to judge, Damon, she mused. Maybe now you'll learn to think before you speak. He shot her a look, but she was already turning away, pretending to be interested in a conversation across the room. I could see the sweat starting to form at his hairline. He wanted to brush this off, laugh it away, go back to being the Damon everyone had always known, the golden boy, the success story, the one who had it all. But now, the ground had shifted beneath him, and he hated it. Across the room, my Uncle Robert, one of the older relatives who usually stayed out of the family drama, chuckled. Well, looks like someone put their foot in their mouth. A few people laughed, not loudly, but just enough to make Damon's jaw clench. I watched him take a slow breath, trying to compose himself. Then, he did what I expected. He tried to take control of the conversation again. You know, he said, suddenly forcing a relaxed stance, success is a tricky thing. Some people strike gold, but that doesn't mean they'll stay on top forever. There it was. The attempt to regain control. To find a way to diminish what I had accomplished without outright insulting me. I just tilted my head slightly, amused. That's true. And some people peak in high school and spend the rest of their lives trying to relive the glory days. The smirk on his face twitched. I knew exactly what I had just done. Damon had always been the cousin everyone compared their sons to. The one who had been the star athlete, the one who had gotten into a good college, the one who had seemed destined for greatness. But that was years ago. Now he was just a guy with thinning confidence and a shrinking sense of superiority. He gave a stiff chuckle, like he was trying to prove he wasn't bothered. Man, you really grew a backbone, huh? I shrugged. Life has a way of teaching you things. Damon exhaled, glancing around as if checking how many people were still watching this unfold. Too many. His fiancée, a woman I barely knew, was standing a few feet away, pretending to be engaged in another conversation, but obviously listening. She gave him a side glance, her expression unreadable. Aunt Lisa, still holding her glass of wine, suddenly decided to twist the can-fay. So, Damon, she said casually, how's work? His mouth twitched. I wasn't the only one who caught it. Lisa knew exactly what she was doing. Damon's entire identity had been built on being the one who had his life together. But I had heard through the grapevine, mostly from my mom, who still kept tabs on family gossip, that things weren't going as smoothly as he made them seem. His real estate business was struggling. The market hadn't been kind to him. And there were rumors that he was drowning in debt, trying desperately to keep up appearances. He cleared his throat, shifting on his feet. Oh, you know, the economy's been rough, but I'm managing. Aunt Lisa gave him a knowing look. Is that right? He forced a smile, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. My mother finally spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. I think it's good to remember that success comes in different forms. And that just because you don't see it happening doesn't mean it isn't there. Damon nodded stiffly, but he wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at me. I could see it now, the realization sinking in. He had spent his whole life thinking he was the measuring stick, that everyone else in the family was either beneath him or trying to catch up to him. But now he had to look at me, someone he had written off as insignificant, and realize that I had surpassed him in every way. I wasn't going to rub it in. I didn't have to. He already knew. I took a sip of my drink, letting the moment stretch just a little longer. Damon swallowed, then finally muttered, "Good for you, man." Seriously, I nodded. Thanks. But we both knew it wasn't over yet. Damon was struggling. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw, in the way his fingers fidgeted against the edge of his phone. He wanted this to be over. He wanted to move past the embarrassment, past the fact that he had just made a complete fool of himself in front of the entire family. But I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Not because I wanted to be cruel. I didn't. But because for years, he had walked around like he was untouchable, like he was the blueprint for success, while the rest of us were just fumbling around in the dark. And now, The spotlight was on him, and he didn't like it. Aunt Lisa was still watching him with that knowing smirk, her wine glass swaying slightly in her hand. My mother had settled into quiet satisfaction, standing nearby, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. And Damon? He was still trying to find a way to salvage his pride. You know, he said, forcing a more relaxed posture. Success isn't just about money. It's about stability, about family. At the end of the day, it's not about how many zeros are in your bank account. It's about the people who show up for you. I raised an eyebrow. That's a nice sentiment. Did you read that on a motivational poster? A few people chuckled. Damon exhaled through his nose, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm just saying, he continued, money comes and goes. Real success is about legacy. It was a weak attempt at shifting the goalpost. If he couldn't be the wealthiest one in the room, he would be the wisest. The one who really understood what mattered in life. I let out a small chuckle. Legacy, huh? I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the room settle before speaking again. You know, that's interesting coming from you, considering how much of your legacy is built on tearing other people down. His jaw clenched. You spent years measuring people by what you thought was success, I continued. Telling people they weren't meant to make it if they didn't fit your version of winning. HLL, you just did it 10 minutes ago before you knew who I was. His smirk faltered. And now that you realize you were wrong, I said, setting my drink down on the table beside me. You want to change the rules of the game? Damon swallowed hard. I leaned in just slightly. You always assumed you were ahead of everyone else, I said, my voice just loud enough for the surrounding family members to hear. But you never once stopped to look over your shoulder to see who might be passing you. The room had gone quiet again. Damon's fiancée, whom I barely knew, shifted uncomfortably beside him. I caught the way she was looking at him now, her eyes flicking between him and me, as if seeing him in a different light. Damon opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in his life, he didn't seem to have the words to dig himself out of this. I let the moment stretch. Then I leaned back, giving him a small, knowing smile. But hey, I said, you're right about one thing. Success isn't just about money. It's about the people who show up for you. I turned slightly, looking around the room. You might want to pay attention to who's still standing by you after tonight. Damon's face paled just slightly. I didn't need to say anything else. The message was clear. His power in the family, his position as the one everyone looked up to, the one everyone wanted approval from, was slipping away. And I wasn't the one taking it from him. He had done it to himself. I exhaled slowly, letting the satisfaction settle in my chest. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't some over-the-top revenge scheme. It was just the truth. And the truth was the best revenge of all. Damon gave a stiff nod, his lips pressing together. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess I deserve that. I smiled. Yeah, you did. And with that, I turned, walking away from him, away from the past, away from the weight of the kid I used to be. As I passed my mother, she gave me a small, approving nod. And for the first time at one of these reunions, I wasn't just showing up. I had arrived. I didn't look back as I walked away. There was no need. The damage was done, but not in a cruel way, just in the way Damon had never expected. His entire life, he had built himself up by looking down on others. He had spent years treating people like they were stepping stones in his own personal climb to greatness. And now, he had been forced to look up at someone he once dismissed. I heard the low murmur of voices as I moved toward the back patio, feeling the cool night air hit my face. Some of my relatives were still processing what had just happened, while others were clearly enjoying the shift in power. Aunt Lisa, ever the sharp observer, clinked her wine glass against another relative's with a quiet chuckle. Well, she mused, I suppose that was long overdue. My mother joined me outside a few minutes later, standing beside me as we looked out at the darkened yard. You handled that well, she said, her voice warm with quiet pride. I shrugged. Didn't really have to do much. He walked right into it. She chuckled softly. He always thought he was the smartest in the room. Yeah. I exhaled. Guess tonight proved otherwise. She glanced over her shoulder, peeking back inside where Damon was still standing, looking like he'd just had the wind knocked out of him. His fiancée was speaking to him in hushed tones, her arms crossed. From the look on her face, the conversation wasn't going well. My mother smirked. He's going to be thinking about this for years. I laughed. Good. And I meant it. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I wanted him to learn. I wanted him to sit with the reality that he wasn't the only one who could succeed. That belittling others didn't make him bigger. It just made him smaller in the long run. I wasn't sure if he'd change. Some people never do. But I knew one thing for certain. Damon would never look at me the same way again. And that, in itself, was enough. I stretched my arms, feeling lighter than I had in years. My mother patted my back, then nodded toward the driveway. You leaving soon? She asked. I thought about it. Maybe I would stick around a little longer. Not for the reunion itself, but for me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a quiet observer in my family's story. I was part of it. And this time, I had the last word.